Yeah, well, believe it when we see it.
Well, at least move it out from under the tree.
Yeah. Yeah. 3 minutes. I will call the city council work session to order on Tuesday, March 25th at 6 o'clock. Work sessions are intended just for information gathering and staff presentation. So I want to remind all of you that no decisions are made tonight. It's just really a listen and absorb, and we can give staff direction if we want them to follow up on anything, but no decisions tonight. And so now we'll move on to the body of the meeting. And Sammy, would you like to call a roll, please?
Yes, Counselor Bowman.
Here.
Counselor Wells is absent. Counselor Lyman.
Here.
Counselor Bell.
Here.
Counselor Engelbretson.
Here.
Counselor Smith.
Here.
And Counselor Myers.
Here.
We do have a quorum.
And it's Mayor Bell, but just for the record, you can call me whatever, but yes,
Until you got a demotion.
I did. Well, no, I got a promotion. That's right, I get to vote. All right, so our work session information consists of 3 items: the Collector Street project, which is North Coleman and Mill Streets. And the community will go over the community survey again in greater depth and with the opportunity for questions. And then a proposal or a discussion anyway of fireworks within the city limits. So with that, I will turn it over to Adam Hanks and let him take this show on the road.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, it's kind of a work session that puts three disparate topics together, just smush them into what can be as long or short as you would all like tonight. I'll just run through the packet materials. Ended up being quite a few packet materials. We'll go through the PowerPoint here in just a moment, but a printed version of the PowerPoint for the Collector Street project is in your packet. The memo from Megan goes along with the Collector Street project discussion. And then there are two larger documents that both relate to the survey. One is the actual survey itself that we almost had in time for the last council packet, but was not available. So a lot of the material in the body of this survey is very familiar. It's what they went over in the presentation. The follow-up, which is a little more raw looking, this is the document. It's kind of an appendices. I thought they were going to include it as a formal appendice to this document. We may ask them, we may try to make a final document of it, but really the reason for handing this out is it has the text, just open-ended questions, which I actually meant to get to before tonight, but I haven't looked at them. Brian, I think, went through them. So I think it's, it's interesting, yeah, at very least. And I thought the group, the presenting group at U of O did a really good job of taking all of those, somewhat random stuff, putting them into organized buckets and themes, and that's what they presented last time. But it's good for you all to see the raw data, and we'll talk about what we want to do with that. And then the final document is the council memo, just has some background information about fireworks and why it's on the agenda, and we'll talk about that later. But I think the majority of the hour and change-ish, or whatever you want to spend, is focused on the Collector Street project. That one's nearing go. So we wanted to make sure that it's been a slower roll. I think it was funded before I got here, in an interesting funding situation or mechanism. It was a pass-through funds from a certified agency through to us. They could do some swaps that kind of unencumbered it from some of the requirements. And it ended up being cash in the bank. So we have $748,000 that was originally MPO funded money from 22 or 23 that we have in the street fund, and it was designated for the Collector Street project. And what we'll talk about tonight is what we think is what we have as a phase one, which we think approximates what now phase one would cost, what maybe the whole project was thought to have cost in 21 and 22 when that was originally being contemplated and applied for. That's just a common theme we've talked about across all of our infrastructure, is numbers from between 2020 and 2022, which is common when you look for funding. You're really early on in the game. You use estimates that are good and real at the time. You put some escalation cost into it, but we have seen cost escalations go far beyond what kind of the prior historic annual increases were. So with that, we can start the PowerPoint. If you wouldn't mind, Sammy, throwing that on there. And of course, Brian Harmon, Public Works Director, here with me on all of these projects. It's a tag team or more. I'm the accomplished. I'm the Robin to this for the behind the scenes stuff. And then Julie Leland at Branch, obviously they design the projects and project manage these for and with us. So really a part of the team as well. All right, so yeah, phase one. So there's where it is, just in a Google map. Really kind of the center of town, and collectors. There are only a few collectors in our street network, which is probably pretty typical for the size of it. Collectors are meant for the network of local streets to kind of funnel into a larger street, which then funnels into arterials. So there's neighborhood streets, collectors, and arterials. And the next slide gets into our actual transportation system plan designations. The next. So this is from 2014, the TSP, which at some point we've talked about a bit. We have a couple of reasons it needs to be updated. If you see the map, the the blues of a collector that's ours and collector that's Lane County's are not very different blues. Unfortunately, same thing with interstate and arterial, but we know what the interstate is. Those are both red, but basically what we're talking about is, and maybe I'll just go up and point also. Project is the Coleman is right here. So really the collector spine for Coburg is here and making kind of this U shape. That really everything funnels into that or it goes directly to the arterial. So this side of town, the west side, which doesn't have any streets with a collector designation. Those are all local streets that go straight to North Willamette, which functions, kind of skips the collector step and goes from neighborhood street to arterial and functions well. If those streets connected as a network, it might be a different story, but they don't. So the primary collector that we have is the Coleman Street spine that then turns on the south end is Dixon, and on the north end does multiple jogs. And for money reasons and for kind of TSP and policy reasons, we've broken this into phases. The money I described, 748,000, we're hoping that we hit the mark there. We may be a little bit over, depending on what the market has with when we add engineering to it. The construction cost, we're fairly confident the construction cost of this phase will be right around that 700 mark. But when you add in the total engineering design cost and the project management inspections, it's likely to be a bit over the allocated 748,000. We'll have a better number for you on that when we bring the bid forward. But the goal is to generally minimize the use of local street funds and maximize the MPO grant funds that were originally allocated. So this project actually, phase one is north of Pearl and turning the corner, if you want to, turning the corner on Mill Street for 2 blocks to Skinner. So it's a good chunk of the collector. And I added in the very front slide a circle. What we've been able to do, what we think we're able to do, as long as we get through Lane County, is adding the flashing beacon crosswalk that was talked about at length in the Transportation Safety Ad Hoc Committee. That plan included those recommendations were included the beacons there, and that was approved by council in the July 24 council meeting. So we think that it's best to do it incorporated with this project. We already have to get Lane County permits and approvals right at the very end there where we start the project. So we're putting that in there as well, which we think is a really added feature that wasn't part of the original grant application. So on the screen is the project layout. We've hopefully done some, Brian and I walked the site. We've talked with Julie. We've had red line plans a couple times already. We've made a lot of adjustments to and lessons learned really from the North Willamette, Harrison, Macy about how to really do a full street reconstruction in an existing neighborhood. When we do a full street reconstruction, we are required to do storm drain. We have to account for our storm drainage. So most of these streets, they're current. If we just did some patching or overlays, we could leave the storm drainage system as is. We could just leave the street layout, the widths and how everything lays out identical. But when you do a street reconstruction, then you're required to address storm drainage, which is costlier. It is more impact because it changes driveway access points a little bit. It changes parking configurations to some degree, but it actually resolves some of the conversation we had right before the meeting started about puddles. It properly handles storm drain, which really is not a matter of aesthetics and convenience. It's a piece of infrastructure, and with the desires of the street standards in Coburg to not have curb gutter setups, that changes what the design is. It means that there's a lot more of the right of way utilized for storm drain infiltration and rain garden type bioswales. And you can see on the plans there, it really means that if you're not on asphalt, it's very little availability of kind of this open-ended parking that is kind of a hallmark of most of the neighborhoods. And that is some of the negatives. It brings some structure and clarity and definition to things. But the negative is it does use up, it's fully on city right away. It's not people's property. But people have somewhat unfettered use of it for decades. So it feels like taking away their property.
Want questions now or?
Hey, we can go through it. I don't have any particular order for anything. Yeah,
So are there any obstructions like fences?
we do. Yeah, we have a couple places where we're going to have to move things off. So they had pre-surveyed. So I pulled some kind of highlight slides, and the plan set is really thick with a lot of spec and detail. In the final plan set, we can email it to you as well. There's still a little bit of adjustments, but yes, there are a few places where, unfortunately, one of them is a fairly recent fence, which is a bummer. If we would have had the availability of a conversation before they installed it, we could have nipped that one. I don't think we have any structures. We have one garage that's really close, but not, we've been able to engineer around it. Yeah. One of the hallmarks of the project that is actually kind of detailed in the memo, which is really backup. It's kind of technical documentation that is required for a project, but it illuminates really what our street standards are and how this project was designed to meet the city's street standards for collectors. And so that's the memo that that's from Megan. That was a requirement that she submitted that to Julie for the permitting. But it really steps through, how this project meets all of the street standards that have been adopted by this and prior councils. And that's really more than a guide. That is the mandate for how streets are designed, especially collectors. And the added piece of a collector that I think we talked about in a council meeting is sidewalks. And I know that has, you can see that actually in the surveys. There's some commentary, and we see that on some conversations in social media that we do or don't want. There was mixed in the survey, which was super interesting, knowing that this project was coming, to see the survey say, why don't we have sidewalks? And then some say, why do we? Why are we starting to see sidewalks? This does have sidewalks on one side. It's on the west side of Coleman, and then it crosses Mill and is then on the north side of Mill. We originally looked at it on the south side of Mill. A lot more obstructions, a lot more driveway access issues there. The north side of Mill was much more free of encumbrances, so it got moved to the north side, and I think that's going to work well. One of the biggest obstructions along this is Pacific Power's utility poles. By franchise, they would have to move them if we need them moved, but they don't always move them in the timelines that we would like. So there is a dance about how much you force them to move something versus how much you design around it. So we've been able to design around it and I think maintain a really quality project. Trying to think of where the slide, one of the memo talks about some access issues, and one of the goals is where possible to utilize alleys for access rather than extra driveways. Thanks. Okay, yeah, I know I'm bouncing a little bit. That's perfect. Thank you. So we have one site in particular where we've really focused, instead of kind of having two auxiliary driveways right near an alley, we've consolidated that and having extending the alley improvement and then having people come off the alley. So their alley will be paved and then they come off of that. That might be the easiest. Yeah. So that's one of the considerations, and one of the kind of standards in the street standards is to attempt where possible to minimize driveway, shared driveway, encourage shared driveways. Is it right? It's this one, right? Yeah. So there were kind of two informal driveways here. So if we maintain the existing pattern and just paved where people had been doing things, we would have a driveway in this area both to the right and the left of it. We've shifted the storm drainage to ensure that this one is a full width access for this property, but their secondary access now comes off the alley
And this one, we've extended as much parking as we possibly could, moved some of this storm drainage here, and then came off the alley. So they, instead of coming off the side here, they'll come in here with a paved alley and then turn in and still have access to the rear of their yard, just from a slightly different way. So there's that's a lot of the design considerations, is laying out kind of what mathematically works, because you take the total impervious surface, and then there's calculations to say how much storm drainage system you need to handle that impervious surface. And it's always a push and pull about how much asphalt and how much storm drainage, and where that storm drainage has to exist because of grades. You can't just put it, oh, we'd like to load it over here. Well, if the grade doesn't go that way, it doesn't do any good. So it's an interesting and delicate balance. And you know, I've said in our meetings internally, is this is, you know, a new one on me to do major street reconstructions without curb and gutter. And I got the first experience with it on North Willamette. It has a lot of positives. It truly does, but it also has some trade-offs that, you know, that just need to be known, you know, and it's neither one is better or worse than another. I've grown to really appreciate and like this, you know, this style. It does take up a lot more surface area for infiltration and bioswale type storm drainage. And as we get more of it, it's more maintenance. It's a different kind of maintenance. It's more continual, kind of hand maintenance rather than back truck, you know, big system maintenance, less frequently, but bigger stuff, versus kind of more frequent, and both for aesthetic and for, you know, long-term functional actual absorption. You can't just leave them. So that's an interesting component over time for us.
What, have we gotten feedback on the Willamette Macy project from neighbors in terms of parking, et cetera?
I think well, no. And as far as the bioswales go and the maintenance, we're just now a few months into it. So, you know, those comments might come probably this time next year.
Yeah, for the bioswale, kind of the look of it, the aesthetic, and what our responsibility are, I would bet you're right. I think from the initial kind of layout, we had a lot of meetings, and Brian did some one-on-ones with people on site to kind of say, here's what's happening. And we made a few slight on the fly adjustments, just a few feet here, a few feet there. And the contractor was really good as well. We really benefited from a quality foreman on the site. We have one ongoing thing about, you know, there was only one parking stall in front of one property. And there's a little bit of, you know, turf war, I guess, about who gets to park there. There's parking across the way. It just, by grades and everything, it wasn't possible to make that what it used to be, which was 3 parcel width of just uninterrupted parking. Then we have one leftover small one we're hitting this spring of a pedestrian crossing across the swale, which makes sense, and I think we can handle real easy. It's one that we didn't catch early on, but it was a lot of you know, kind of walking the site, design work, and we'll get to the project schedule that we'll set up an open house for neighbors in general, do a mailing, have them be able to come in, and then also after that, be able to do one-on-one appointments out. And what I think has been useful, you know, Brian was able to, you know, explain to people what our constraints are. You know, it's not, we don't have as much kind of free sketch as it might look. We got a pretty big right of way, but there's a lot of constraints to say that these are more locked in than they seem. But sometimes when you just look at a picture and you go, you got tons of room, why are you guys doing this? Until you get out there and look at it and you say, well, see the slope, this slopes here, this goes here. And you can see kind of the Lego pieces or the Jenga pieces.
Have we or are we planning on doing any parking enforcement? If you know, if the parking area is on the west side of the street and people continue to park in front of their house on the east, are we looking at that at all?
Yeah, you know what, the project, the North Willamette project, there's 1 or 2 places where they're parking opposite, right, wrong direction for the side of the street. So those are obvious ones. We have T-bar paint markings for parking spaces just to be efficient, so people don't park in the middle of a 2-stall, you know, and just waste spaces. I'm not sure
I think the enforcement side will probably become on the actual safety, kind of the egregious stuff, which is that, parking the wrong direction means you're driving the wrong lane, you're crossing, that stuff is pretty straightforward. We've given kind of a grace period to get, was that just at the beginning, or is that going to be the long-term habit? If it is, we will address the long-term habit of that. I don't know what this project might present us with some different, parking habit changes. There's a couple of them that may, like actually the one on the screen is pretty decent here. There was a conversation about this is a 2-stall instead of taking it a 1-stall
I
and bringing it back
can't
out.
see your cursor.
You can't. It doesn't show up, right? You see it circling.
Well, it doesn't show up on this one.
It's hard with.
Oh,
the-
wow. Okay, weird. Okay. Now it's kind of going away on this one. It's one that was next to an alley and in a
Could
driveway.
you just point it out
Yeah.
maybe on? Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
So there are some where the concern is that the parking, if somebody's rear, front end or back end, right here in this spot. So if they're parking here,
Okay.
if they 2 spaces, they may extend, there may be some extending beyond a parking stall into a driveway or an alley. That's probably our likely, which I think fairly minor, but likely thing that we would want to.
That's a 2-stall part.
Yeah,
there. I
right,
see what you're
right. These are just etched in. They're not part of the bid spec yet, but these are the T for this space and then this space. So if somebody's parking here and it's blocking somebody's alley access, that's obviously a parking issue that we'd follow up on. I think there's no time limits, right? So we don't have anything that's other than the 72, the regular abandoned vehicle thing. But from a parking patrol, kind of a 4-hour, 8-hour thing.
Complaint driven.
Yeah, yeah.
Was an issue.
This would be an example of a parking issue, right? Somebody's putting rocks.
Right. Yeah. That situation, that's the fence.
The rocks there.
But that's the fence that's the issue that we talked about earlier too. So yeah, the rocks and the fence in that case, but the rocks clearly are one where the good way is this resolves that because we're using the right of way, right? So people aren't kind of making their own systems. But yeah, these will be asphalt, and if we have problems later or people trashing the infiltration areas and the bioswales, we may get into the signage business a little more and say parking in paved stall, paved areas only. That might be, and then if they don't after that, we might enforce that because that has real infrastructure issues if people are compacting our storm drain systems. So, and that's it's always good to have an enforcement reason, not just cause it's a, hey, you're actually messing up the system. And they may not even know it, the first few times. So that could be something we see here. And that may happen later over time if there's infill, ADUs or other lot splits or something that can happen here where, it ends up being more parking demand on street.
Question, are either of you forcing any sort of eminent domain type issue with this project or?
This is all in the right of way.
Okay.
Yep.
That's a very, very good thing because that can get messy.
Yep.
And it probably, those conversations will come up, but
Yeah.
clarity is, like Adam was alluding to, for decades, people have used the right of way as their own property. And at some point, the city has to utilize that. So in this, as we go through these reconstruct on streets, we're taking back that right of way and utilizing it for the greater good.
I mean, this came up even when DFN was putting in their underground cables and people were going, oh, you're in my yard.
Mhm.
Oh, you're in
Yeah.
the right away.
Yeah, Councilor Bowman, I think you're right. We will hear those words probably from 1 or 2 folks who think that that's what's occurring, but yeah, explicitly know that all of it's happening in the right of way, but they may have that assumption or thought that this is my property. What are you're using it, and like it never has been, never.
Well, it's better for us that it isn't eminent domain
Correct.
because that can get really messy and really complicated.
And it takes a long time. Yep, yep. We would, if we had one close, we would be talking to you all way early in the design process about, do we even do it? Or do we design around it if we can, all that. That conversation probably, if that was the case, that'd be before you even apply for a grant, because those are that big of a deal. Eminent domain is a rough deal.
It has to be very, very important.
Yeah.
For the future well-being of the city to
Yeah.
even consider that.
Yeah, it's a high bar as it should be. So the majority of these screenshots are just to give you a flavor of the layout. You can see along the top of Coleman Street. This is the crossing here. So it would be the side closest to Willamette. So it's the west crossing. We'll have the flashing beacons. And then the sidewalk continues along that west side. And it does some meandering, which I kind of like aesthetically, as well as it's functional to move around certain utilities and things. So this is the general. We've done some value engineering to try and see how far into some of these intersections we can add on. This is really like Dixon's the great example here, or no, that's Lincoln, excuse me. Yeah, McKinsey's the next one. Both of these we have looked at how far in can we go that makes sense to catch some really bad pothole stuff on these non-collector streets, because we're already out there and they're feeding the collector. So I think we have some creative extras that I think weren't part of the original concept of the collector, very economical add-ons that really accomplish some of those. That really, the cold patch stuff is very temporary solution. This provides a permanent, 30-year solution. Nothing's permanent. Yeah, nothing's permanent. So that's probably, I can run to the timeline, and then we could gladly look at, here's a building that technically, this middle and the upper, it's technically in the right of way. It's an old building, nothing new. We're able to work around it. They'll have to redo, they park a trailer here, like a utility trailer. So they'll have to, that's a kind of just a change of habit. Won't be able to be there, but the structure doesn't get in our way. There's a few that are close, but that's, I think, the only one that's actually slightly over, but it's not problematic to the project. And then we have some mailbox relocations. We're still working on traffic control devices, stop signs, yields, what makes the most sense. It will be different than it is now. We were just working on that today about what makes sense. Because with collectors, you typically want the collector to be the through traffic that doesn't stop. The others stop as it comes to a collector. With a collector taking a turn right here, this may be a right turn, no stop, but the others stop. That's still being the traffic engineer with Branch is still providing us guidance on what that final design will ultimately look like. But undoubtedly it will be different. And our take and our ask of the engineers is, let's start with the lowest reasonable bar, and we can always add traffic devices if we see a problem or a need. It's much harder to take them out after they're in. So we'll probably go with a minimal, and we'll let you know what that is. And then if we have identifiable, hopefully empirical data problems, we will address them rather than opinion problems.
There are no speed cushions.
Oh, thank you.
Section.
Thank you. I was just going to ask that.
Yeah, and that was something that Brian mentioned in our meeting this morning, which was good. And I think that doesn't preclude the concept of it further north on Coleman on the residential side, which we've talked about with the traffic or the transportation safety ad hoc. Now that we see them in play in the other neighborhood street, open for that. That may be a good tool for later, but yeah, they're not super appropriate on our style of collectors. There are some collectors in larger cities that do utilize that, but those trip counts are way higher than ours. So yeah, nothing posed on that. That's the traffic control. That's the beacon. So that'll be very similar layout. These the aprons need to be redone. Those aren't super old, but they are older than what is currently legal for ADA. So those on the west side will be redone. And then the placement of which they would get torn up just to place all this stuff anyway. So those will meet the new standard and have to go through the county for approval on all of that. There's some landscape, there's street trees that will be in. We've asked the Park and Tree Committee to provide recommendations for the type of street trees that they think fit the best, and we will incorporate that into the bid documents. So they gladly took that on. Because some will be near power poles, and they're actually going through a project of updating the street tree list in general. So it was really good timing. So we have Park and Tree helping on that. The placement, there are suggested placements here, but as we did on North Willamette, we will hold that off probably till the very end and see, do those still make sense as we do any value engineering. They happen at the end anyway, but I think that'll be a nice added feature to the project.
There are some trees.
Yep. One significant one, but it's been by nature and by human pretty pretty rough. But it's one of the big older ones, and it's probably due anyway. And then a few smallers. So it's not significant on tree removal, but there are some. Yeah, thanks.
Well, that might be a blessing in disguise.
Agreed. Any other tidbits? So this is one down here at the bottom. This is the Mill Street going west towards Norma. If you turn south on Skinner, there's a particularly bad stretch there. I think this is a great idea that Brian had of how we can extend paving only. This is more of a we're staying below the threshold of needing to do full storm drain there. We're just adding some asphalt. It's not going to have the same complete base that the rest of the project has, but it buys far more years than Cold Patch would there. And I think it's a really smart move, and we've identified kind of the extent of that. So we're really squeezing as much as we can out of this project to benefit the street system. So here's the schedule. Looking at that's right around next week, having the final design and review all the the 90% plans that we get our hands on and do a final walkthrough. Kind of tentatively planning, it could be the week of April 7th, or it could be the week of the 14th. Either one, we haven't landed on it, but just wanted to be sure that embedded in the schedule is an open community open house here with big 24x36 plans out. I think similar to what happened, you all did that with North Willamette, which sounded like that helped a lot. And then we'll also at that same time, we'll take notes and try and educate, but also just take notes of concerns, see if there's any adjustments that could be made to fine tune based on those concerns. And then also offer up one-on-ones on site to just kind of walk it and look at it. And sometimes that's way better than looking at a set of plans in a building. So, and Brian can work his magic out in the field.
So the house that just put in the new fence, did they get a permit for that, or they were replacing an existing fence? I think.
Well,
Maybe.
They replaced something that was existing in the right of way.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so on
Okay.
something like this, what we do is the project will cover the cost to relocate that back out of the right of way. So instead of just totally removing it, and we'll just relocate it back. This is something that that cost is probably going to be minimal, but there will be a cost to the project to do that. And because it's not, it's not that difficult to move that style of rail fence.
The challenge, of course, is it changes their landscape design and everything. It moves things on the wrong side of where they planted things as well. So there are some, and those don't come out of the project, how to fine tune that. But, and if they're very interested in handling it themselves, it's fine. We'll give them a date by which it has to be, out of the right of way, whether they can reconstruct on their own schedule if they prefer to. But typically, yeah, which happened on North Willamette, we did have two fence sections that were kind of the standard dog ear side cedar that we worked with the property owners and moved them back, and they did not bear the cost of that. And that worked out fairly well, because then the contractor doesn't have to worry about timing and a homeowner not meeting the date and then stopping our whole thing,
So it's a corner lot. Is it in the right of way of both corners?
This fence is just in the front.
It does turn the corner a little, but I don't, it's not in the project way. We can let them know whether or not that's in the right of way or not. It's really close on that side. It may not be. Yeah, it's set back pretty far, in which, as Brian described, and I've had years and years of doing fence stuff. It's very, very typical that people will replace and upgrade a fence and put it where the old fence was. And so it's, you know, it's not usually very nefarious. It's just not checking in, you know, or wishful thinking, hopeful. And sometimes
It's
those
always
can,
been there. so-
right. And sometimes you put a new fence in the right of way and it lasts another 30 years, you know, and it isn't in the way of anything. So, you know, I think our goal is to not treat it, you know, no citations or no problems. It also crosses right over the top of a meter. So it's one that there's a couple reasons it should be moved, anyway, but we'll address that one.
Yeah, and a lot of times these fence relocations, this is where, project like this is where it would happen. You know, if somebody, I guess is staff, I don't feel like people that have encroached in the right of way are doing necessarily a bad thing. Because most of the time, what they're doing is they're taking care of that right of way, and making it look good. So in some sort of improvement. The downside to that is when project comes through and now that gets relocated back outside of that. So now we're responsible for that area. If that makes sense. So, you know, in one sense, it's getting taken care of by the homeowner, but once we come, we'll move that. So that one that's the fence that is on the Lincoln side, when we do a project on Lincoln, most likely that's when that would be.
In a perfect world, we'd put, you know, we'd have something in the file and they would sign and say that they have, you know, that they've encroached in the right of way, and they'd get an encroachment permit that has a, you know, they've signed clause that says, you know, if and when the city, you know, does improvements and needs to utilize the right of way, the fence will be removed at owner's cost. They sign. That's kind of the big picture, perfect world to have all that. There's a lot of, you know, even buildings though that are in the right of way. That's not, and it really isn't uncommon. It's more common in alleys than streets, but it does happen on streets too. So, you know, that, yeah, I'm not sure if we ever did record anything. The communication, of course, at least letting people know, an encroachment permit lets the next owner know, you know, that's the usual problem.
Actually, there was several years ago, sent out a letter to people, community members that said, you know that what you're doing or what you have, the structure you have or the fence you have is probably in the right of way. Right now, we're not doing anything about that, but
Yep.
in the future.
Yeah. Yeah, notification and awareness. So then when they do replace it, they don't waste money either. They replace it and scoot it back a foot, 2 feet. Some of them are 6 or 8 feet, but some are slight. So awareness is always good. So we will, you know, we'll be hitting up this property owner early. Won't wait for an open house. We'll proactively talk with them, just like we did with the one at the end of North Willamette.
They don't know at this point in time.
We haven't talked with them yet. No.
Don't go telling them.
No. So how far will the fence go back and how close does the asphalt go?
That's a great.
the asphalt- Yeah, asphalt doesn't go too close to the sidewalk. They're on the side with a sidewalk.
And so there'll be a sidewalk there.
There it is. So it's this property right here. So there's the property line, there's the back of sidewalk. So, you know, we'll be putting the fence somewhere back towards property line.
Like 4 to 6 feet then.
Probably, yeah, 3 to, let's maybe, yeah, somewhere in there.
Without being out there and actually saying, the best way to do
Yeah,
this
he had it on
is,
but
once the project has been out, you know, staked out.
Yep.
And then we can really have conversations.
Yeah.
Because once the stakes go in, we know exactly where everything is supposed to sit.
Makes sense.
They don't have a concrete driveway. It's just pavers.
That's correct.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's concrete back on their property. It's not in the right of way area.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's, you know, there's some concrete. So the concrete aprons on the project are when it crosses a sidewalk, the driveway accesses are concrete. when it is just coming off of the asphalt, the side of the street that doesn't have a sidewalk, there are asphalt approaches. So that's the difference between these as well, for the most part. So yeah, that's one that we'll be working on. And there's a gas meter, up here. There's just stuff, with any project. There's more stuff going on in the right of way than it appears. Always, yeah. When we're
Well,
in there,
that is the reason some people don't want sidewalks.
Mhm.
is be-
Absolutely.
Because they know that when sidewalks come in, everything gets moved back.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so that's really the curb and gutter thing, is a part of it. If we don't have curb and gutter, we have more storm drain, surface, and sidewalks. Really makes a wide system. I would say the beauty of having storm drain infiltration and bioswale is that it pretty much mandates kind of having the park row, which separates the sidewalk from a driving surface, and better than curbside from a safety aesthetic. Yeah, I think it slows things down. It's a nice amenity, but the downside, the trade-off side, is it takes up a lot of width of right of way to do that. Yeah.
Adam, in the old part of Coburg, I mean, the new housing developments, they're very aware of where the right of ways are. But in the older, more established part of Coburg, I'm not sure, because I used to live next door to the house with the fence. I'm not sure that people really know where their right of ways are.
Oh, I agree with you. Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty
It
common
might
that they
be
don't.
helpful at some point to be able to, time permitting, take a street at a time and say, just so you know, this is your property line or
We're going
whatever.
to send out notices first and to everybody about the open house, and that'll be part of that open house, and then a follow-up. But you're right,
But just
people
in
are,
general, not necessarily on this project, but just
Oh.
in general.
That's actually a pretty heavy lift.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
what has to happen is, we have to have the surveyors come out and actually
Okay,
survey.
so you can't
Right.
just.
So we
go
use a
the road.
project like this for this educational piece, right?
Okay.
So that pre-planning up in front, letting people know, hey, look, you're out and then the folks that are kind of on the outside of this project, so like off of Lincoln,
They'll start
off both
figuring it
sides,
out.
and McKenzie, they'll start thinking about, oh boy, I wonder how much of this
It's right away.
is going to affect me when they redo this street. So we start thinking about those things, and that's kind of the educational piece. It's not in a perfect world, we'd have the
No.
whole town surveyed and everybody would have a pin and we would know, and that's a perfect world. But when questions come in, to the counter, we can direct them to the tax lot maps, on RLID. And if you get to the obviously Google Earth and Google Maps doesn't tell you pins and stuff, but if you get the tax lot maps, that is a way to, people know what their lot dimensions are. And you can deduce, really where your property is. But yeah, it is super common that people don't know. And even if you have curb, gutter, sidewalk, people think their property goes beyond that. It's a very, very common misunderstanding about the world we operate in. Yeah.
Maybe in a newsletter, but just to say, if you see where a telephone pole is or a utility pole or the sewer box or the water meter, fire hydrants, those are all indications that that's on city property.
Right. Yep, that's a very easy clue. You're right. Yeah, very visual clue to say. And a lot of those, a lot of the alleys, you look at the power poles, those pretty much align with one side or the other of the right of the alleys. So that is a very practical indicator. Yep. So back to the project, then we'll wrap up this and move on to the next topic unless there's more questions. But here's the layout. So open house in one of these 2 weeks, and then double back around and any fine tuning before the bid goes out. The bid's about a month. Bid intent to award happens after those bids are evaluated, all scored and lowest responsive bidder. And I think we had some, right when I got here, we talked about what responsive meant when we had a bidding appeal. And then it comes to council for your approval, local contract review board process. where you ensure that the bid process was followed. And then tentative, both of these dates are tentative. Oh, geez, May. That meant June. Yeah, not going backwards. Yeah.
about
Yeah, that's June 26th start date. And again, you know, if we are really close to that, we may wait till after the 4th to start that. You know, and because of, you know, just it would be, we if we're that close, don't need to make a mess before that. Maybe we'll see. One of the goals is to have an open-ended as we can on the start and stop date and give a broad window. That had proved fairly successful from the cost standpoint of the bids on the North Willamette. A window, we kind of found that several of the bidders, we had a lot of bids on the North Willamette, which helped us really pick a low bid. Kind of a second season project, because we're a little late to hit kind of this get going right when the weather allows. So we're kind of now playing in this second season market. And we're actually thinking that the projects of our size, they're big for us, but they're small for most bidders. That this project window might work really well for them coming off the tail end of their initial season project and moving into grab onto ours. And that's kind of what Riverbend did last season. So that's kind of informally a plan, right? And it also worked out. We don't have the project done yet. The design.
5-month project, though.
What's that?
It's a 5-month project.
Yeah, it will be from, you know, some of that can, you know, the start is some of the survey, you know, staking and prep, you know, it takes a few weeks for it to be visibly noticed that the project is start in some cases. The noisy stuff, you know, the grinding and laying down, that happens, you know, halfway through the project. There's a lot of prep. They'll probably do concrete first. Is what they did last project, but that's at the discretion of the contractor, what order. We'll get that later about what order they do things in. And there will be traffic control plans. So there will be, you know, obvious, you know, issues with, you know, road.
Concrete was nice because it kept, as a pedestrian, you were not then in the construction area.
Yeah.
So that worked out really well.
People walked in it during the construction, just on the sidewalk part and stayed out of the roadway. Is that what you mean? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And if that's available to do without, you know, obstructions and trip failures and all that kind of stuff, we can do that with this one as well. So yeah, that's the plan. You know, if we delay the construction start for any preference on our side for, you know, other events going on, you know, obviously the Halloween date extends a little bit, but that's usually striping, signage. It's kind of the neighborhood impact part. It would probably be done by then, even if the project isn't technically done by then. Well, that's it. Really cool. Phase 2 is you know, dependent upon funding. It's the other direction. It's Coleman South, turning the corner on Dixon, and, you know, going back to this slide. The rest of the collector, you know, going South Coleman and turning on Dixon and heading. That's a pretty clear cut project. Then phase 3 is this zigzaggy that you know, has been a hot topic since the day I started here with you all about, is that the right pathway for a collector? This has some challenges. There isn't a no-brainer answer to this, where the top end of the collector comes back out to North Willamette. That's a multiple years away conversation to be had. We don't need to worry about it now. We don't have funding, and really, I think the important part of the spine of a collector is we're capturing it with phase 1, and then we'll capture the rest of it with phase 2. This volume here of the collector needing to make that final connection is I think, out of the 3 pieces, the least critical. And we'll have to update, if we want to do anything different than this, we have to have completed the TSP update process, which is a huge lift also that is multiple years out. So I think it's very advantageous that we're using the funding for the one that we know. You know, what we know is smart and good, and there's really no kind of policy question or transportation planning question about these first two legs of the project.
We're not doing anything on North Skinner.
Correct. So that's the collector, and we burnt a big chunk of things. Project. So the survey is probably just a little more closing the loop part. We talked about, we spent a good amount of time at the last council meeting. I thought the presentation was really well done from the team, and they really coalesced stuff really well. My couple of comments that I hit a little bit then is that, as you all saw from the kind of questions and what we, what was posed in the depth of those questions, that it really was, the intention is sentiment, general values, and then eliciting those open-ended comments just to help inform. It's one component of informing, future decisions for council, and how we bring things forward to you and how we do. I thought the question on communication on how people want or expect to receive information from the city was very telling. We'll focus our work plan, our communication plan, to hit that. It's what we kind of were assuming. It kind of validated what we kind of thought was the preferred methods, the primary. But I think it's always interesting to especially get those open-ended things to get people's opinions and their level of understanding of what we do and why. That helps kind of flavor what public outreach and education we might find is valuable, and some stuff it's probably may not rise to the level of educating. It's just opinion. Still good for you all. So I don't know if there's anything in particular that you wanted to hit on with the survey. My really summary is that it wasn't intended to be statistically, valid sampling that should be just, blinders on followed. I thought it was, had really good sentiment in it and really high marks. I've seen many that just the people that, don't really even like the town they're living in, they're just full of negativity. And this wasn't. So I think from a broad, 30,000 foot level, the takeaway of those that responded, that's pretty solid response for one, and a pretty positive response. And then the criticisms are, stuff we can work on.
Oh, we could merge with Eugene.
I just,
Just like, sure, let's do that.
okay. Then we could get rid of the government and the cops.
That's right. Yeah, there'd be no government. Because everybody seems to be where we're at.
Did you become the mayor of Eugene then?
So, I don't want that job.
I don't think Eugene wants us either.
No, they have their own problems.
Yeah.
Every city has their own problems to worry about.
How interesting. We can go over the comments, saying that. Interesting.
Yeah, that's just more FYI for y'all to armchair perusal if you want. The final agenda item is fireworks, and the reason it came up, I put in the memo. I think in the June meeting last year, there was just a question. It wasn't advocating necessarily. It was a question from council about, hey, what do we think about, regulating fireworks? Because it was right before 4th of July. And of course, the answer from a staff perspective is, whoa, we don't have enough time. There's no way to do anything about it. So we kind of put a tickler in to say, okay, if that's of interest, and we didn't hit it at the retreat. I had it kind of in my back pocket for last council meeting, but we ended up going long there, so it didn't come up. So I thought we'd tag it onto this and just see if there is any interest. If there is interest, we have to jump on it now and put a bunch of work together. I just put a couple bullets. I did a cut and paste of the FAQs from Eugene. Eugene does have one, Springfield doesn't. I think we talked about that recently. Some cities have them. It's more common where cities that are in forest interface, that's where I came from. One of the earlier cities in the state to have a fireworks ban. I think it was useful and important. I'm not sure the same conditions exist here. Well, I'm sure the same conditions don't exist here. But the question was just an open question because we do have time if there is interest, but we'd have to jump on it right away. So that was general direction from council to staff is the reason for it being on the work session.
Did we have any issues last 4th of July or previously?
Not really. No, I think from a, Larry's standpoint, he couldn't be here tonight. Talking to him about it, his take is, is that they respond to any of them, whether or not they don't query first to say, is it illegal fireworks or illegal? They respond. And usually it's some kind of FYI and best practices check. Hey, might want to get the hose out, if they see anything of issue at all. And I think that's just good community policing and checking in. It's not heavy handed at all. And they did respond to a few, but I would not call those problems at all that I know of in the last year or two.
We haven't had any fires that I'm aware of that related to fireworks.
Right. Not that I've been informed about either.
I think my concern is enforcement for one thing. And I think the other thing is most of the people are pretty reasonable, and I don't know that a ban is going to at all intimidate those who put off the loud, obnoxious ones.
And often those are already illegal. They just aren't local ordinance, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And I don't know what good a ban would do. I think, if they're reported as really loud or something shooting off into the air, if the police or fire respond to check it out, I don't know that the cost of a ban would be worthwhile at this point.
Yeah, and Larry's point too that he mentioned was, there are code sections, there are laws that could be enforced if something is egregious. They have the discretion, as officers to say, hey, this is, reckless endangerment. This is disturbing the peace. There are a number of things that if something is really out of whack, it doesn't require a fireworks ordinance, a local regulation to hit the very the far problem end if there was one. So yeah, he's in no way saying that's a tool that he would like to have in the toolbox. He's not not opposed, and that really is the intent. It's from a staff position, it's neutral. There are a lot of community values issues that go with it. There, many of the cities that have a ban also fund and support a community display. They exempt those. Those have to get a permit. Those have, I was part of that before. And that's an alternative. So if you have a ban without an alternative, I think what you're talking about, it can actually agitate and say, well.
And I think that if there's due diligence on the part of the fire department and the police force during that week in the evenings, there's a little extra so that if there is a report, they can respond quickly.
Well, I think from my point of view, I certainly wouldn't advocate for a full ban, but however, I think some type of regulation in terms of limiting the conditions under which they can be done in terms of 4th of July only, New Year's only, not the 5 days prior to or after 4th of July. Some sort of regulation, I think, would probably be a good thing because it is somewhat, not to be a curmudgeon, it is somewhat annoying to sit there on July 2nd and you hear bang, bang, bang. And it's like, really, dude, it's 2 days before. So I think some sort of, even just some sort of regulation would be a good thing.
I mean, that's really, again, from a council direction, historically, I've been used to having at least a majority head nods to do something, and it would be an ordinance development. It would show up. It would need to show up in the May and June council meetings, first reading, second reading, public hearing, all of that to approve something. We can make that a priority. It's, but I really would, if that is a desire of the general direction of council, obviously we'd put something together for you.
State doesn't have any regulations in terms of when fireworks can be set off. That's city by city.
Yeah, I don't think so.
there's other land use thing, some cities have issues about sales, how and when they can be sold. There's some cities speak to that in their code, in their ordinances, and some don't. Some, don't allow the sales of or the use of. Some just don't allow the sale of, that's as more of a land use thing, to all these temporary tents and flags and all that kind of stuff. So there's a whole variety of things about how different cities do it. Some cities do have date ranges, and then of course the retort to that is, I want to fire them off for, whatever my preferred, religious holiday is, or birthdays or anniversaries, or, how are you going about defining what celebrations fireworks are approved for? But as Councilor Bowman said, it's routine to have problems the days leading up to and the days after, and those can often be the ones that are less controlled environment and can be problematic. So whole range, I've seen quite a range of this, and I've seen a lot of dilemmas about kind of the cultural aspect of it versus the safety aspect of it. And what's the role of local government, even like philosophical. I've seen a lot of those conversations. So just looking for, I guess, not necessarily consensus, but maybe majority nod, because if it's something that clearly won't pass if it gets moved forward, I'd rather probably not work on it.
Did I hear you say you wanted to solve this by posting the fireworks display? For
Maybe not exactly what I said.
Mr. Bowman has given his opinion on it. Thank you for that.
And I'm not trying to control the rest of you into something you're not.
No, I
willing
just
to
I
do.
want a head nod. We need to direct staff in terms of how to move forward. So Counselor Lehman is doing a thumbs down, I see.
Well, I hear where you're coming from, Counselor Bowman, and I agree with it to an extent, but I'm also feeling like right now I don't know that Coburg has enough of an issue with it, and we have a lot on our plate already. So I would tend to say maybe we don't need to do anything this year. Wait and see if things get worse down the road, either in terms of safety, especially like fire safety and stuff, or gosh, I can't get a night's sleep because these people are firing these things off in the middle of the night. I mean, that would come under disturbance of the peace anyway. So
You're right. It could be a tool that we already
I kind of
have.
favor of just leaving things where they are right now. That's my personal feeling on it. I don't feel
And
super
for
strong.
now,
either
I'd
way.
like to leave it the way it is, but also, keep on the table Counselor Bowman's comment and revisit it if it becomes a problem.
Myers.
Yeah, I'd like to leave it the way it is. Having been prior law enforcement, I think counseling with fire and LE goes a long way. So, like you said, the illegal fireworks are already illegal. So making them illegal again doesn't stop them. I think we're good.
I assume you probably have police presence scheduled for the July 8th.
Little extra coverage.
Yes, pretty typical. A
And-
pretty
and I-
typical industry thing. Yeah.
I can tell you
Fire's
that
always out.
when I do my monthly little mayor's notes, I will certainly start in May and June in reminding people via fireworks safety and being courteous to your neighbors in terms of noise, and that if there is obnoxious use, that if they report it, someone will respond. And that's about all I think we can do at this point, based on what y'all are saying.
And again, I can't say that I disagree with your perspective, because I don't disagree with it at all. But I think it's a good discussion to have. And like I said, I don't want to be perceived as a bah humbug either. I mean, so we'll keep it on the table and probably reassess it on a yearly basis.
Or if complaints rise or there's an issue.
I mean, some people just grew up doing a lot of fireworks, and for them, that seems like the right thing to do. I didn't grow up with a lot of fireworks. I grew up on a grass seed farm. We didn't shoot off fireworks. So, you know, my perspective is very different than somebody that grew up in that environment.
Up in Montana, where there was a lot of mines and leftover blasting caps and stuff.
Oh,
Those serious
Gotta say,
fireworks.
the lines kind of work here.
yeah, different perspectives.
I
for
have to think of some
each
of
of
the
us.
things we created.
Probably get your visit from the ATF.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
No, not there.
Okay, anything else?
Well, before I
Oh,
forget,
yes, thank you.
I just wanted to place on the record that March 25th is National Cerebral Palsy Awareness Day throughout the United States. And I'm only doing this because it's the first one since I joined the council. Obviously, people view me as who I am first and as a counselor first. That said, I am meaningful that my membership here plays a role of representation. And I'm very mindful of that, very aware of that, and very, very honored to be able to fly the flag, even in a local context, because there are not many folks with cerebral palsy or with disabilities in general doing this sort of thing. There are and there have been, and there will be exceptions, of course. But I'm mindful that that representation is meaningful. So I just wanted to highlight that. And some quick facts for you. Cerebral palsy was discovered during the Victorian era, so the late 1890s. It's one of the more common neurological congenital disabilities. That means at birth. Luckily, rates are sort of flattening out, which is a good thing. It's not necessarily life debilitating, but it can be. Just depends. I'm sort of what they would classify as fully physically involved, but no cognitive impairments or anything like that. But that depends on where the damage is and for how long.
You've been here since the 1890s.
No, no. Thankfully, I don't think I would have had a very good life
Yeah.
in 1890. But the technology has come a long way. The treatments have come a long way, but there's still work to be done, obviously, and it's not something we know a whole lot about yet, to tell you the truth, especially in adults.
Well, thank you for that, Counselor Bowman. I personally appreciate it, and I think I speak for all of the counselors. And I appreciate that curve has flattened some. That had been my understanding from studies that I read. So that's a good thing. That means we're at least making strides in the right direction.
And I noticed Counselor Engelbertson is wearing green.
And she is.
That is the color of the Cerebral Palsy Foundation,
I was on the same wavelength.
although it is the wrong shade.
Oh, but who cares, huh? It's green.
Is it darker or lighter?
It is it's almost a lime green.
Okay,
It's like an electric lime.
well, that's
Oh,
nice.
well, I have a shirt. I could have worn that. Okay, well, thank you. Anything else for the good of the order? If not, I will adjourn this meeting at 7:11. Thank you all.
Do you think of the idea of putting in the newsletter something about, you're curious about where your property line